Welcome back to week 2. Hope y'all enjoyed the book because I know this week is going to be even better than last week. And reading and checking out the first 5 chapters was something that I truly enjoyed, and I learned a lot about myself and a lot of history as well. I'd like to welcome Chanel back again, of course. Welcome back to week 2. Hope y'all enjoyed the book because I know this week is going to be even better than last week. Can you hear me? We having technical difficulties by Chanel not muting her video. Y'all don't
worry.
We'll be back. Well, I'll pass it to Ms. Ramona because right now she's controlling everything and showing her genius as always. So thank you for coming on and supporting all of us in our journey to grow and to be better.
Welcome back, everybody. So this week, we're going to start out with a quote from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Chanel, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you're going to talk a little bit about recapping last week.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Last week was great. We got a lot of really good feedback, and we appreciate your input. We appreciate all your comments and all your support. As we're going through this process, I've been getting a lot of feedback about a lot of people feeling overwhelmed, feeling like they don't even like to log on to social media anymore, that they want things to just kind of go back to normal. And I know that it can be overwhelming dealing with such a heavy topic, especially when it requires a lot of self-reflection. And so I really want to encourage everyone to keep pushing. I don't want people to get burnt out by posting, feeling like they have to post every single day. They have to, speak up, right? Black Lives Matter every single day on every platform, because that is going to cause burnout. And honestly, that's great that you're speaking up, but the real work is within. And this journey to anti-racism is that it's a journey. I had a few DMs about people saying that they felt like they really understand things now and that they feel anti-racist. And I want to say it's really not some overnight process. If you feel like yesterday you had racist thoughts and today you're magically anti-racist, there's probably more work you have to do within. And so I want to encourage everyone to really do a lot of self-reflection, a lot of self-examination, work on yourself, work on your household, work on your families and your communities. And we're all on this journey together. I had somebody also tell me that we had a conversation with kind of a friend, and they were expressing to us that they just don't even know what to think anymore. Like, it's too much, there's too much going on. And it really took me back after I watched this video from the 1970s, and it made me think about who I would have been in 1965, right? Would I have been a bystander? Would I have been someone who was scared to speak up? Would I have been someone who said, you know what, this is too much, this is too hard work, things are never going to change, I quit? And I'm not going to be a quitter, and I don't think I would have been a quitter then. And I'm hoping that you guys won't be quitters, and that you won't let the media and the different posts and all the overwhelming terms and all these things deter you from doing the real work, because this is about us. But when I look at it, it's more about our kids. And I would really hate for TJ, Cam, and Corey to grow up in the same world that we're in today. That means we didn't do our job. And so I hope you guys are in it for the long run. And welcome back.
Okay, so I know that Chanel, you put up the Becoming Anti-Racist map. And did you want to talk a little bit about that? We have the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growth zone. You kind of talked about a little bit in that conversation. Any final comments before we move on to our definitions?
Yeah, like I said, it's a journey. We're not going to go from the fear zone to completely anti-racist in one day. I think a lot of us are in that middle learning zone. Like, our eyes are opened, we're researching more, we're doing more of the work. And that zone is going to take some time, and it should take some time, because there's so much to unpack. And everyone who's showing up here today, that's the first step. And so let's just continue on this journey. Don't get overwhelmed. Don't get distracted by all the posts and all the different, things going on. And then let's just do the work together and privately, in our own homes. And we'll make it there eventually, even though Tori thinks he's there already.
He is. I'm sure he is. Well, it's really important to be honest in the work. And like you said, those are some of the first steps. So let's get into the definitions. So chapter one was heavy with definitions. We're
Heavy.
not going to get into them, too deep. We're going to talk a little bit about the ones we have, and then we're going to have some comments back from Tori and Chanel about the ones that really resonated with them. So we have racist, one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction or expressing a racist idea. Anti-racist, one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. We have racial inequity. Two or more racial groups are not standing on approximately equal footing. Racism, a mirage of racist policies and racist ideas that produce normalized racial inequities. Racist policy, any measure that produces or sustains racial inequity between groups. Every policy is either producing racist inequity or equity. Racist ideas suggest that one racial group is inferior to another and claim that inequity is a result of inferiorities. Anti racist ideas, on the other hand, are not neutral, but opposed to this notion, claiming that racist policies are the cause for the indifferences. Anti racism is made up of anti racist policies that lead to racial equity and which are supported by anti racist ideas. And finally, racial discrimination, carrying out a policy or taking advantage of the lack of protective policy. So let's go to you, Chanel. You're going to give us some comments, and then we're going to have some comments from Tori as well.
I thought chapter one was super important because I think a lot of the roadblocks that we face come from not agreeing on terminology, right? And so, especially the idea of racism, some people believe racism is straight up just like hating another race. And so it's easy for them to say, I'm not racist because I don't hate anybody. I'm not, overtly racist. And so understanding the term of racism here, which is racist policies and racist ideas that produce and normalize racial inequities, is important because a racist isn't someone who has to be blatantly, like, outright disrespectful and hateful towards a group. But as he stated, through actions or inaction, which is, I think that's where a lot of people fall in that inaction category, that we're supporting racist ideas and we're supporting racism through our inaction. And I think that's where a lot of people fall. And when we have these talks about racism, people get caught up on the word, the R word, he called it, because they feel like it's this really derogatory, like really hateful thing, when it's not as in your face as you would think all the time. And so people kind of correlate that racist term to something that's like the most despicable thing on the planet, when it's something is not as obvious and conscious, right? Some things that we're doing that we don't even know we're doing. And so I think us all getting on the same page about these terms helps us have these conversations more meaningfully. So we're not getting caught up on, okay, well, what exactly is racism? Does this count as racism? Does this is the definition for this purpose that we're going with? And I struggled with some of these terms at first, but the more and more I read into why he, had the certain definitions that he had, I really understood what he meant. But I think the terms racist and anti-racist are probably the two top ones that we need to really focus on, because as of last week, half of us said that we're anti-racist and half of us said that we're racist. And so, or we said that we're in the middle, and there's no middle, right? We determined that last week, there's no middle.
Absolutely. There's no middle.
Yeah. So I think that was the one that stood out to me the most. I know, Tori, you had one that you wanted to talk about.
Now, I just thought overall, just the definitions in general, I've never, in my mind or my knowledge of this educational journey, like always, racist was just racist, like, and it applied to so many different things, and I had no way to distinguish anything. So I thought for literally any and everyone that reads it, it makes it clear, because oftentimes you have a hard time describing like what racism is, or even any particular instance. For example, you may say something and you may feel like, all right, this is racist. Like, oh, maybe it's prejudice a little bit. Or you may say this, oh, maybe it's bias. And so like, to have definitions like this, it made it very clear. And also it challenges your own personal view of racist ideas and racist practice. Because it's like, okay, well, I'm not racist at all, but then I agree with this. Well, this is technically a racist policy, but certain things you don't even realize it. So to
Right.
me, it was enlightening for myself to learn and to read what he was saying and the points that he made throughout the process.
Can you,
Thank
I think the racist policy one got me tripped up a little bit because I couldn't, like, off the top of my head, think of things that were straight up racist policy. You have to kind of like read into it to
right.
see, oh, I can see how this created an inequity in some way, shape, or form. So, Tori, can you give an example of that?
For me, it always stands out to me the criminal justice system and literally voting, right? So in
Right.
America, we talk about our rights. We have our right to bear arms, which obviously can be taken away if you become a convicted felon or commit a crime. We have our right to vote, which is also something that people took and used the opportunity to take away people's right to vote. Like we've all been taught and we all understand like voting is the currency of democracy and understanding the way our country was built and policies and the way they were put in, when it comes to voting alone, there used to be poll taxes and things to punish Black people or deter Black people from using their vote or impoverish people as well. They put in certain things, obviously, way back. They had educational requirements for people to vote. But even present day, removing the right to vote in Virginia, where I'm from, they call it disenfranchised rights. You commit a crime and you become a felon, your right to vote is gone. You can never do it again unless the governor individually gives you your rights back. Now, why is that? It was put in that way because we all know policing, you know, the way it transformed from literally slave catching to wanting to keep people behind bars for money and punishment and to take away that right to vote. Like once you become a free man, like we say, whether that's an enslaved individual or a person who was behind bars, when you're free, you're free. You're paying taxes, they're doing everything that everyone else is doing, but you're taking away that individual's right to affect change through the power of their vote. And that's a policy that we know the way it was built, it was a racist policy.
Right? Because who were put behind bars the most were Black people. I think another thing, and I want to know what you guys struggle with too. So in the chat, if there was a term that you struggle with, or maybe it challenged your original thinking, put it in the chat so we can see. One of the ones that challenged my thinking was the idea about racial discrimination. And he said something like, the only way to cure past discrimination is to have present discrimination. And I know a lot of people struggle with that because they're like, if we want all things to be equal, why are we now doing things like affirmative action, right? And so what he explained was that if a discrimination creates equity, then it's fine. The problem we have is when discrimination causes inequities. And so I thought that was key because I know I was personally attacked in college. Some girl in my class basically was like, most of the Black people on this campus are either here because of affirmative action or through sports. And I remember her being so frustrated that there was anything in place that would help Black people get a better chance to get into colleges. And so in reading his definition of racial discrimination and talking about if it creates equity, then it's a good thing. And until we get to a point where we don't have to have these conversations anymore, that reverse discrimination is needed. And so
It really looks at like who's in power, who's the one making the laws, who's the one at the local level, the state level, the federal level, who are making the laws and policies that are, keeping these racist policies in place. So I think we do have the question on the screen that where the definitions of any of these terms new, were they new? Or did any of them differ from your original understanding of these concepts? And which terms, again, are you struggling with? So if you guys could put that in the chat, we would appreciate it. So as we transition, we really want to understand that these definitions anchor us in our principles. If we don't do the basic work of defining the kind of people we want to be in language that is stable and consistent, we can't work towards stable and consistent goals.
agreed. I think a lot of people are agreeing down there about the voting practices with the racist policy. I think that's one of the most obvious policies that clearly are not anti-racist.
Some people have a hard time even seeing that. They're like, well, an individual committed a crime, so therefore, like, just because something was that way and like that's the way it's been, doesn't mean that it's right. And I think
Right.
people struggle with that. Like literally, say hi, TJ, and go. TJ's behind me. He coolly is walking in. Go back down. Go back outside. A lot of people, they struggle with that because it's like it's the way it's been, and our kind of law and order mentality that this country was built around is like, well, this person doesn't deserve this because they committed it.
Right.
Well, this
Right.
person also is paying taxes, the same taxes that you're paying. This person is also going out and performing the same duties that you perform on a daily basis to provide for your town, your area. And there was literally instances where military wise, they all of a sudden they would brush some of these things aside so people could even join. So like it goes to tell you like what's important, and people truly understand that, and we understand it was a systemic issue.
Right.
Well, this clearly is going to take us right into our next topic, which is race and power. So, Kendi says in the book, we are what we see ourselves as, whether what we see exists or not. We are what people see us as, whether what they see exists or not. He has a lot of tongue twisters in his book. So, looking at that as race is a construct, but it's also a mirage. It has shaped our lives for centuries. So he says that he talks about a little bit about hierarchy was the first racist idea, which is a little bit of what you were talking about, Tori, and how it perpetuates these racist policies. And the root of the problem, he says, has always been the self-interest of racist power. So if race was created by white people for power to justify this hierarchy by saying that black people were less than human, what do you think about that? Tell me your thoughts on that.
This is kind of like, if you don't really look at this and understand why race was created, the concept of race was created in the first place, it's really, really hard to understand racism and to see it in all its forms, right? I was teaching TJ. He asked me the question. He said, Mom, well, why do people have to be grouped anyway? Why couldn't you just group people by what they liked? Why did people care about the skin color? And I had to explain to him that in order for there to be a hierarchy, there has to be groups. There has to be a top group, people in the middle, and then a bottom group. And in order for white people, and I know some people don't like the word, but I have to say what it was. White people created it and created this concept in order to justify a structure of why they're the superior race and the ones underneath them, in whatever order it was. I think he said it was Europeans, then Asians, natives,
Right.
Native Americans, and then black people on the bottom. They created this hierarchy. And so what you said was key, that it wasn't really necessarily out of hate. It wasn't like white people just hated black people. It was for self-interest. Like, in
Right.
order to have power, you have to have a hierarchy. And to put them on the top, they had to create all of these stereotypes and all of these things about black people that justify why they were at the bottom. And so I think they said, like, we were, one of the things they said, we were physically, we were physically superior. So that would
Right. We're going to
justify
get
why.
into that conversation. That'll be interesting. Hopefully, people are taking the poll.
Yeah.
And that to me,
Tori.
that we talked about, Chanel, when we were discussing this chapter was like even Christianity, right? We live in a nation that its backbone is Christianity. So they say. I don't see it lived out, but that's what it's supposed to be said. So in order as a Christian to go and to be comfortable enslaving people and
Mm-hmm.
treating the people the way that you want to be treated, or that you don't want to be treated, but you treat them like dirt and like animals,
Yep.
you have to justify that they are animals.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way this country was built, on that labor. But to help their consciousness, like we had to decipher and really push black people to the dirt in order for them to be comfortable moving forward.
And TJ asked that question. TJ said, well, why do people believe them? Like, black people weren't animals. They were human too. Why did so many people believe them? And I said, well, they had to tell them these things about black people that were lies that would make it make sense. Like, oh, they're violent and impulsive, so we have to control them. Or they're really, they're built physically different, so they're good at working. And so, oh, that's why they were slaves. That's why they were workers. And so you have to understand that. If you don't understand why the concept of race was put into place for the purpose of white people to have power, plain and simple, if you can't say that out loud, then you're really not reading. And so we need you to really understand race was literally created for self-interest and power. And it was effective, right? The whole country was built by white people. Well, not physically by white people, but was all the structures were built by white people to benefit white people.
And I think
So
even Rosemary had a comment about, why did we as Africans sell our own people? And again, out of self-interest, right? Because even that hierarchy that is here, there was a hierarchy in Africa that they felt that they were superior and better. And it doesn't make it right, but it doesn't discount the people who bought Africans and brought them over here and enslaved them. So, it's like you can't just say, oh, well, your own people
yeah,
enslaved you or sold you because, we weren't buying ourselves, right? So, Tori, what do you think about that?
I mean, to me, I think looking back, even there was literally prisoners of war at times. There were villages, like you said, it's self-interest when people are able to even to convince you yourself that your people are worth items, like material things that you can sell. So I think one, as you talk about a power structure that was built a certain way, how do you convince someone that they should that your people are worth currency and that's
Mhm.
more valuable than your morals? Again, that goes to self-interest of those individuals as well, and that entire system just continued to grow and obviously thrive for hundreds of years.
All right. So,
can I say something really, really quickly?
yes, you can.
It's so important that not only we understand the origin of that, but that these systems are still in place today. Like those very systems that were built, even though things have changed, laws have been changed and continue to change, we're still very much living in a society run by white people, white men in particular. But like we still have to understand that even though we've changed and we've come a long way, we still have a lot of dismantling to go. So I just wanted to add that. I'm trying to catch up on
On
their
your chat, right? Well, at least for this time, we're actually getting a chance to pay attention to it. So, as we're looking up the chat, we're going to go into our next conversation, which is really going to be a deep one, and it's about dueling consciousness. So, dueling consciousness is one which is torn between segregationists, assimilationists, and anti racists and pulls on racist power. That's what he says. So, thinking about this, let me just get over here to our notes. Thinking about this, it says that he says that, and then he says that Black dueling consciousness is the struggle between assimilationists and being anti-racist, right? So, Tori and Chanel, what are your thoughts about that?
This was probably our favorite chapter so far.
It was good.
It was really, really good, and it really opened up our eyes to a lot of like a whole lot. So first and foremost, we are always constantly dealing with this dual consciousness. They said, well, in the book, he said for Black people, it's you're always going between wanting to assimilate and wanting to keep your Blackness. And that's a constant struggle every day, especially when you're trying to go into corporate America. So in order to really fit into corporate America, the standard of that is whiteness. And so in some way, we feel like we have to assimilate. We have to meet their standard. We have to talk like them. We have to dress like them. We have to, uphold this standard, this American standard. But then at the same time, we want to keep our culture and keep our Blackness and feel like we don't have to give up ourselves. And so that's a constant struggle daily for us. And I know Tori, you talk about that a lot too, because he's getting into media now and he sees it a lot. So I want you to share a little bit of that.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off what you said, even going back to, so like people don't understand, like people have to understand that like the way what's professional was created by white individuals. So please don't take it as like an attack on white people, but like that's literally the standard for the way that you talk, the way you enunciate, the way you present yourself, your attire. It was a white standard. And that's something that, we have to be comfortable talking about and address before you can go into the other part of the conversation. And so for myself transitioning into the media world, I've literally been told like you have to smile on camera because it
Mm.
come off as angry or intimidating. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? So if you're ever watching ESPN or Sports Center and you see these black dudes just sitting there just cheesing their lights out while someone else is talking, like that's your tip, and you know why? Because the stereotype, I guess, is that that black people you can come off as angry with your listening face.
Right.
And I've literally, like the way I talk, I'm a Virginia boy, so there's some words that may or may not be grammatically correct, but just the way I can give the same information that someone else gives, but it may not come off the same based on the way it's pronounced, the way
Yep.
you pronounce words, the way you pronounce certain words, right? And I've been able to see and kind of like, now that you're in that field, you literally get coached out of these things. So I'm literally getting media training now to be coached out of the way I naturally am. And so
Tori, before you, and I'm interrupting you because I want to know, you're getting coached to be out of the way you are, but do you feel you're being coached to not be black?
I mean, I feel like that's what the standard is. The
Mm.
standard for enunciating, the standard for the way you carry certain words is white. Like, and if y'all know me, you're gonna get what you're gonna get. I'm fine taking coaching and little tips, but ultimately I'm gonna try to always be myself because I'm not gonna lie, there's been times where I've tried the ideas they say and it's corny, it's not me, for lack of a better term. And it's not real, it's fake, and it's just not me. And I tell y'all all the time, like I feel like me and me being myself is enough in any situation. And
Right.
so it's one thing to fine tune who you are, have little tips and stuff that help you transition. But I'm literally in that industry. You're being groomed to be someone that naturally I'm not.
Yeah, and Samantha put it right in the notes about code switching, and we
Oh, I was
have to
going to ask you
code
about that, Chanel.
switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Samantha. Code switching, it's become natural for us, but in talking about it more, it's like, because we and Tori kind of went back and forth on this. He's like, well, it's just a professional talk. I'm like, well, who determined what's professional and what's not professional? And
Right.
obviously we have things like a dress code, right? And we had a situation that we're going to talk about that just happened in Baltimore. I don't know if it was this past weekend or what, but the dress code, we understand saggy pants, like underwear showing. We understand no one wants to see your underwear in the workplace. But things that are very particular about a dress code is basically telling us, and it seems very targeted to Black people,
Mhm.
like that with Atlas, the Atlas Group, whatever that restaurant chain is. Everything on their dress code, it's like they had a picture of a Black person in their head, and they said, "These are all the things you can't wear into this establishment." And so
Saw that.
yeah, and so we have been taught that our Blackness is not up to standard. The way we talk is not good enough. The way we dress is not good enough. The way we wear our hair is not good enough. And this is why cultural appropriation really becomes an issue for Black people. And I know a lot of white people think that we make big deals about stuff, but when I wear braids or if I wear my hair in a certain style, it's seen as ghetto or it's seen as not professional. But when someone in mainstream, society like Kylie Jenner, I know you guys love Kylie Jenner, when she wears it, it's high fashion and it's acceptable. When we listen to certain music, what you say? I'm sorry, Tori.
Bar.
You're what?
Pushing the bar. She's testing.
Yeah.
Right? She's doing all of these innovative things that Black women have been doing for 1,000 years.
Yeah. And even with our music and the TikTok era, it's cool for, white kids and other kids to dance to the music and make these videos. And it's not ghetto when they do it. But when we do it, it's seen as like negative. And, these kids are listening to this horrible music and it's sexualized and all these things. And so they can do it and not be judged.
Or
We
you
can
get the
do it
look.
without judgment.
You get the look, right? You get the look.
The look
If
is
they do it
serious.
right.
So, I mean, that dual consciousness for us is we want so badly, especially for TJ. And it's a shame that we think about these things, but we want TJ to be educated. We want him to be able to present himself well. We want him to be able to go into corporate America and do really well. And so, under that, we need him to be closer to whiteness. But then on the other side, we're like, we want him to be proud of who he is. We want him to know that being Black is not a bad thing, that talking the way you talk is not a bad thing, that you don't. And so it's like, how can you have both? Can you have both? Like, that's a struggle. That's a real struggle for us on a daily basis.
And that's a good transition into what we're doing in the communities, because you're like, okay, is it your culture? Like, when you go in, what are you trying to do? Understanding that basically you're wearing two hats, two different masks, probably the best. You know, when you're in corporate America, or when you're trying to be yourself. And you know, and this book made it clear. It's like when we go in, it made you question yourself. Like when you think about philanthropic work and what are you doing? Are you going in and trying to change who they are, or you trying to, like? I think that's what people have to try to do. Like, we're gonna go in, we're gonna put in our Superman cape, and we're gonna save you and change who you are as an individual. When our approach is, we're coming in and we're trying to bring out the greatness that we know already exists.
Yep, that's the difference.
Version of yourself, which is something that, you know, we don't really talk about. You don't really think about it because you kind of just do it, right? But if you think about the reason why you're doing certain things, sometimes you can learn a lot about yourself. Because reading that in the book really had me sitting back like, wait, when we come in, are we trying to just tell them, oh, this is what you have to do to make it in corporate America? Like, you are good enough? And I'd be the biggest hypocrite if I did that, because if you watch me, like, yes, I present myself well, but I still feel like I present myself well and I'm being myself. You know, like, there's some folks where there's really two different versions of them in a way of, and I'm not going to say I don't have two different versions of myself, because I'm sure naturally, and as much as I'm trying to deny it isn't there, I'm sure it's there a little bit. But
you're like different spaces. Like, well, think about it. You're an athlete. Certainly you're not going to show up as businessman Torrey Smith the same way you showed up on the field, right? So there's our places where you're going to show up differently depending on what's going on. However, if you're authentic, the way you show up, you're always going to be the same person. You're always going to be Chanel. You're always going to be Torrey, no matter where you go, whether it's the community, the field, or the boardroom, right? So you're going to have those conversations, and people are going to know, oh, what to expect from you, because it never changes. Right?
Yeah. You know, when I saw someone put that in the comments, in your own community, in our own Black community, that will hurt you at times.
What?
Like, you'll get the time, oh, he talks white. Or if they see how you are in the regular, and then you just completely turn, it's like, who are you? You know, like, I know my mother had to do that with her job. Well, I remember one time I called her phone, I'm like, did I call the right person? The way she answered the phone. It's like, it's a completely different way of, you know, a way of maneuvering, really, is the best, because you aren't the same way you naturally are on a day-to-day basis.
So this will be interesting. Chanel, do you have one last comment before we move on?
Yeah, I was going to, two last comments. Torrey, I wanted you to just really quickly hit on people telling you all the time that you're well-spoken. Like, it happens all the time.
I mean, for myself, when I'm going places, and, you know, y'all, I mean, I know I played ball, and I know some people know who you are, but I don't assume that everyone knows who I am. And I mean, I wasn't that big of a deal, right? But when I go into places and, you know, people wonder why you're in that space, because obviously I do get into places because I was a former athlete. But when I go there, I'm not coming off and I'm not looking like, oh, he's an athlete, or trying to draw attention that way. And when I actually get the opportunity to speak, whether it's in a group setting or I'm giving a speech on stage, people come out there like, oh, you're so well spoken. And I just look at them like, well, what do you expect me to be? Looked at me, you thought I was going to be dumb? Did you think I was going to be a typical athlete once you learned on stage, or whatever it was that I played ball? Like, what did you have in your mind? What were your preconceived notions about who you thought I would be? And I struggle with that because, you know, and I say struggle with that when I'm meaning, like, I get offended by it. So when I'm offended, I'm going to let you know, in some way, shape, or form, with a sharp comment, which I probably need to be better at as a person. But I think it's important to point out certain things when you see it. And that's something that I struggle with. And then I realized, in talking with Chanel, I've never been out with any of my other teammates. I've been around some great men, some brilliant men. And my white peers, I never heard anyone say to them that you are so well spoken. Like, it's like it's been
right,
and it's expected. But for me, I'm like the exception. And to me, like that really like bothers me. And going back to kind of what we were talking about last week with Chanel, it's like once you people do learn that you're an athlete, I feel like I'm always going out and you talk about, I kept using my little Superman cape thing, but like when I go out, I'm trying to prove that, and it's something that I shouldn't feel like I'm carrying. Like I'm not I'm not the best representation for the Black community. Like I'm not the Malcolm X, I'm not the MLK, I'm not the sole leader of it. But when I do go out, it's important to me to represent my family well, myself well, my God well, and the Black community well, and athletes well, because there is a lot of people have certain things built up in their mind about who they think you are, and it's important to prove that wrong.
And a lot of people in the comments are saying that's the microaggression. That's the passive aggressive comments that they don't even realize is tied to a deeper thought. And so they say it and they didn't mean any harm by it. And you'll point it out sometimes and be like, well, what did you expect? And they'll be like, oh, no, I didn't mean anything by it. You're just, really well spoken. And in your head, yeah.
Right.
It happens all the time. I mean, I've literally been told by a white man that I never thought I'd say this, but I'd allow you to date my daughter. Like that's
Wow.
a compliment, dude. Like keep that to yourself. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, it's like certain things that are said, like people don't realize it. Like I'm sure he really thought like it was like an awakening to this guy, but like it's not something that's appropriate to say to someone.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that that is all very true. So that kind of takes us into the next conversation about biological versus ethnic racism. And are those things that we hold inside of ourselves genetically, how do they come out different, right? So he says to be anti-racist is to view inequities between all ethnic groups as a problem of policy and not a problem of individuals. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a poll in the chat. If you haven't taken it, we kind of want to know if you think Black people have more natural physical ability. Do you agree or disagree?
Be honest.
Yes, please be honest. Please be honest. And while you're doing that, I have one more little piece of information from the book today. It says biological racism is one who expresses that the races are meaningfully different in their biology and that these differences create a hierarchy of value, right? So, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts about this statement, and what have your experiences been around this as athletes, Tori and Chanel?
Tori, do you think Black people have more natural abilities?
I mean, I've been told I have an extra calf muscle. That's why I'm fast. So I'm gonna just go with the majority of people probably think that.
An extra calf muscle. That's interesting.
That's new.
So
I haven't heard that one.
that's why I jumped high and ran faster. So there are things that you hear. I mean, I think that I don't think it's necessarily just straight Black people, but I think genetically and where people live, I do think, to a certain extent, like that helps. Like, why are some of the best long distance runners from Nigeria?
Mm.
Their cult, like where they live, same boat used to run to school. Like maybe that has something to do with
But
why.
that's not biological. That's environmental.
No, it's not biological, but he's 6'5". 6'6". Like there are other 6'5" guys. Apparently we were looking into this to see if there were any studies, because I was curious as to why, like Christian McCaffrey is probably one of the only guys in the NFL to experience reverse, to experience discrimination from a white point of view. He is a minority in the NFL. Christian McCaffrey is a unicorn in the NFL, a white running back. It doesn't. Many of y'all can't even think of a white running back. You just can't. You can't think of a white cornerback. So for whatever reason, it's a very highly skilled position, but they tend to be Black. And so when it comes to quarterbacks,
I was going to say, what about quarterbacks?
they tend to be white, but there was a stigma that Black quarterbacks couldn't learn. And so the stereotype behind Black quarterbacks now is that Black quarterbacks look to run, but thank God that we have Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, who else is out there? Deshaun Watson. There's the renaissance of the Black quarterback right now, which are helping to continue to break that stereotype. But for the longest, people weren't in that position because they didn't think that Black quarterbacks could, one, throw, or we can take that back, one, learn, or two, throw. And Doug Williams from the Redskins is the perfect example of that. Before he was the first Black quarterback to win the Super Bowl, he experienced discrimination in that way from his knowledge, and he went to HBCU.
So I think for me, I think in the past, I think I've heard it so much that Black people are faster. And
Mm.
around me, typically the Black kids were faster in that sport. In track, I ran track. And so the Black kids dominated the sport. And I grew up, I think, hearing so much, even from my white friends, like, of course you're going to win. Like, white people aren't fast. And they would joke about themselves in that way. And I never thought twice about it. And I never knew about the whole research that 99.9% of our DNA is the same. And so I definitely thought growing up that Black people were naturally more athletic until my junior year of high school. My biggest rival was a white girl, and she used to give me work every single time we stepped on the track. And so, and you see different groups represented in sports. Obviously, the NFL is heavily, African American, but is that because we focus on that sport a lot? Like, are there other things that really impact that? Or do white kids play different sports more than Black kids? And I know at one point sports were very segregated because a lot of folks couldn't afford different sports. And so I still go back to be like, part of me still holds on to that. Well, Black people, it is a lot of Black people who are faster, but based on the research, we can't say that, Black people have more natural ability. White people are smarter, Asian people are smarter. And like, those are all the things that have been ingrained in our brains. And those are all the things they use going back to that construct of race to prove that Black people belonged on the bottom. They weren't as smart, they were good for physical labor and things like that, and not for intellectual things. And some people really still hold on to that biological racism.
That's true, but assimilation is believed that we should stop talking about race. They said that there is no race and that we're all one. But
That's
is
the
it too
colorblind.
late? You think it's too late for that?
It's too late to now say we don't see race. Like, everything was built on. That's a great thought, and I think that goes along with the people who say, they
We
want to
don't
be
see color.
colorblind or we don't see race. No, 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 no. We can't. Like, it's too late for that. It is deeply ingrained, and if we can't see race, we can't see racism. And so we're not gonna keep trying to avoid it by saying now all of a sudden in 2020 we don't see race, but we saw it a couple of years ago. Like, it's too late. We have so much undoing to do, and if we don't do that work, then we can't just like poof, like do some magical spell on it and make it be gone.
Well,
So it's,
before we
go
move
ahead,
to
Tori.
before you transition, Mr. Mode, I got to make sure that I do throw Lamar Jackson out there because the Ravens fans for sure pointed out that I missed that. But it's amazing because you want to see discrimination in present day. Look at Lamar. Like,
Mm.
your Raven is the perfect example. I mean, they call him the guy at running back, and he had more passing touchdowns than anyone in the league. So he had to deal with so much more before he came in. He has to work twice as hard just to be equal. And he literally accomplished something that no one else accomplished in his position in history. But how are you the MVP of the league and you're still not good enough? And so I want to
So
move on.
why is that? So
But
let's talk about that for a minute. Why do you think that is?
I think that's always the way. It sounds, and I hope that doesn't sound like, oh my gosh, he's about to complain. But the reality of it is, for a Black individual in a leadership position, um,
Hmm.
you see that in the NFL with coaches, a Black individual at the quarterback position, your leash is shorter. You have to work twice as hard just to be accepted. And I'm sure it's the same way for women in a lot of ways. So that's something that people may be able to relate to because I always throw out there's a reason why in 2020 you're still hearing the first Black person to do this, the first woman to do this. Like, there's
Right.
things that certain people haven't been in position of. So it's almost like once you get in that position, people are almost waiting for you to fail because they don't expect you to do well. So those are all things and walls and barriers that we have to continue to tear down.
Yeah.
I think also if you do well, it's they did well because, right? they always has to have some qualifier. Why
Yeah.
do I have to be qualified? You know, like why can't I just be what I am? Why can't I just be the best athlete? Why can't I just be XYZ? It always has to be, oh well, you know, Chanel, you do so well because you know you're black. You do so well as an athlete
Yep.
and you know because you're black. And it's like, no. How about like you said, like when you know, when you had that colleague of yours who was white that you guys went toe to toe until the very end. No one told her, you know, you do well because you're white, right? So it's like really about having those honest conversations and seeing where we are. So what's interesting is that he says that black people have more natural physical ability. So he admits that. He says, but we are genetically 99.9% the same. He then goes on to say that there's no such thing as to be anti-racist is to recognize this and end racism around mirages. So he says the whole thing about our differences is a
The
mirage.
barrage. Yeah.
Right. So how do we get people to accept that and stop seeing their behaviors as rooted as an entire race and stereotyping all black people or all Asian people or all any race, right?
It's really, really hard to do. Um, even as a like just looking back to things that I knew I thought to be true growing up, and just it's kind of hard to reverse bad habits. And so for us to really do this work, we have to be constantly thinking about how we think because we've been programmed to think a very certain way. And so to see that when we see a bunch of black kids doing really well in sports, I remember we used to show up and my friends, like people would tell me like, I know you're not going to let a white girl beat you. And it was always this like, it was always racially motivated. Like what does her being white have to do with her athletic ability? And so we've been so programmed to think black people are good at these things, white people are good at these things. And that's a confidence thing too. So you have people who go into situations already expecting not to be the best. And I know a lot of white people used to come up to the line next to me already saying like she's going to win. Like we know who's going to win in this race. And so we start holding those. So for black people, we are holding in so many different things. Like we're not as smart as people. We're not as qualified as people. We're not good at these things. We're violent. We're aggressive. These are the things that our kids and that we're constantly having to fight with and remind ourselves that that's not the case. It's not a black thing. And one of the things that I think he said probably a million times in this book, we have to stop seeing problems in people. We're looking at people and we're looking at a white person. I think he said you can't look at one racist white person and say white people are racist.
Right.
And we have a problem with instead of seeing the person, we see them as their entire race and we just attach every negative stereotype that we can to that person. And we have to train our brains not to think that way.
Yeah,
It's
it
really
has to
hard.
show up
Like
first,
Danielle
right?
said, it's
And look at
stressful.
deficits. Look at deficits. He says it's not a problem of individuals, it's a problem of policy. So I know we talked a little bit about that earlier, Tori, but what are your comments towards that?
I mean, I always think that people are capable of accomplishing whatever, black, white, blue, whoever, it doesn't matter. I feel like everyone's or is capable of great things. So when you look at America, it's like it kills me when we're like, man, my grandmother was alive during Jim Crow. Like those are policy issues. Like it had nothing to do with people's lack of ability to learn or to do certain type of jobs or to participate in certain, like they just weren't allowed to do it. And so I think when you're in a position, I think especially when you're talking about race, it makes people uncomfortable and it's easy to hide behind, well, we're all equal because we're all free.
Right.
There's nothing that says black people can't do this. Like it's important to peel back the other layers. Like it's important to know our history. And I know it disturbs people to go backwards because they're like, I didn't do this. But once you look at certain policies that impact us present day, you still see it. Like we live near Baltimore. That's near and dear to our heart to be committed there. Once go look and learn at how Baltimore was built. You
Mhm.
know, it's even John Hopkins, that area. Go look and learn about how that area was built. You'll be surprised at what you learn. And these aren't just things that magically happen. Like it was on purpose. So I think the more we know and the more we're aware of that, not that you're like, oh, you feel like you have to feel bad for everything, but I think it's important for you to understand so that you do have empathy towards what's going on. And it's not just, oh, this area struggles with drug and crime. Like, why didn't we get that same grace when crack was in the neighborhoods versus the opioid epidemic now? I
Right.
feel about both. It's a mental issue, or we need help. You need help, not jail. right? And so these are all things that have impacted families for decades. You'd be surprised if you talk to your peers, they know people the same way we all know someone right now who's probably been impacted by the opioid epidemic. We know people who were impacted by crack cocaine.
Absolutely.
And it's important to acknowledge that because guess what? It wasn't that long ago. And the laws that were in place were still the war on drugs. You know, even Clinton helped to continue to push that. That was in the 90s. So we can't act like these things were so long ago. It's right now. And once now that we're aware of it, we have to change things.
Yep.
So Chanel, how do you think, before we go into the reflections, what do you think about asset building, and how to get people to shift their minds to think about the strengths of the Black population versus the deficits of everything that we've been through over these 401 years here in America?
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing process for not only white people, but for Black people as well. Um, it's really seeing people as the problem is so easy because it's in your face. This person is skipping school. This person is strung out on drugs. This person is, it's easy to pinpoint all the faults in people. Um, but we can't say that that's a Black thing. That individual is struggling with these issues. And if we peel back the layers, like Tori said, there's some underlying root to that. And it all goes back to policy. And Kendi does a good job of really tying everything back to how this was all rooted in policy.
Right.
And before we go to reflection, I realized we didn't hit on the ethnic racism. And I think it's super important to note because I had a conversation with this amazing girl. Her name is Shayna. She's probably on here watching now. And she's Indian. And we had this conversation about ethnic racism and our tendency to, even within our Black title, to have a hierarchy and to,
Right.
to separate ourselves by ethnicity. And we talked about how we always felt like certain people of color looked down on the Black people, the regular Black people, not the people who immigrated here, but looked down on us as like they don't want to associate with us. And she explained to me that she understood fully that her race is the model minority, and that she's safe from a lot of these things that Black people experience. And we go back and forth between us. I know there was we went to school with a lot of Nigerians and stuff like that. And we, as Black people, felt like they thought that they were better than us.
Right.
And they, some of them, in speaking to them, felt like, all right, well, Black people are lazy. And so even within our Black race, we're looking at each other and judging each other and pointing out things to each other. And so that's something that we have to cut out. And I remember as a child, we used to all types of negative jokes about African people. Like if you were too dark, you look like an African. We have all these little jokes, and they're not funny. Just like the white people making jokes about us is not funny. It's not funny when we do that to each other. And I think it's really important to just think about that as well. And one thing that she told me too is that she realized that even though her family immigrated here, they did really well for themselves. They were able to pull themselves up the ladder. On that ladder, they're still here in comparison to white people. Even though they're just as educated, they're still, below. They're not as equal, to white people as they would like to be. And so I think it's important that we always just keep in mind where we are and who we're looking down on and who we're judging. It's so much easier to judge a person than to actually look at the root causes and the structural part of it.
Yeah, he talks about being an assimilationist and how people who assimilate, and someone said in the chat that, they're Americanized, and then that's not necessarily true. Just because you adapt part of your culture to something else. I mean, yes, that is the definition of assimilation, but that doesn't mean that you lose who you are or that you have to be discriminated against because of where you are in that journey, right? So I know people in the chat were asking about the results of the poll. So it says 56% disagree and 44% agree. So what do you guys think about that before we get to the reflections?
I mean, I thought I could see how people think that. You said 46%?
Yeah, 56% disagree and 44% agree. Agree that, Black people have a better ability.
I mean, I'm not surprised by that. That was the norm. Like,
I'm surprised that it's like almost 50-50. That's what I'm
like now we're all adults and we still don't understand that that's not the case.
Right.
I think out of that 56%, some people were honest. Like seriously, I mean, because like the norm, I mean, even with, like I said, I mentioned the guys that, or some of the white guys that I played with that play skill positions, like they still joke about how black people are better. And they're some of the best athletes in the world. So the fact that they have that in their mind, you know, and they know what it's like to be a minority in certain spaces, it speaks volumes. I want to go back to C-Mac again, Christian McCaffrey, because again, I've seen this guy he's a white running back. Again, I keep saying he's a unicorn. But y'all have to understand this because he's been able to experience like, oh, he's not going to be fast, or he can't really play running back because he's white and he's small. And like he's had to overcome all of them odds. So I really enjoy talking to him about certain type of races. I feel like you can't belong. And not to hold this conversation up on football, because the argument there and that I had with a lot of other guys along with him was that football sports is a place where we like to say it's a safe space. You hear people say all the time, the locker room is amazing. It's just because everyone's working together for a common goal. Mm-hmm. The reality of it is football is a place of metrics. So they're some of my peers. I don't want to say they because we keep saying that they they never sounds good. So some of the folks that I was debating with would say, well, why isn't there any discrimination? You don't think there's white receivers out here who should be in the NFL? Da, da, da. And this is an argument talking about why aren't there more black coaches or people in leadership positions? And I always say, well, in football, there's metrics. Show me a 6'3", 6'2", or whatever it is, white wide receiver that's running a 4.4 or better and doesn't get an opportunity.
Right.
It doesn't exist. You're going to get an opportunity in football if your numbers show, if you have the metrics. But the coach, there is no metric for who's going to be a great head coach. You have to be in position. The people under you have to succeed. But if you're not in the positions, you're not coaching quarterbacks. You're not coaching the higher level positions. Again, that's a label in itself. If you're not coaching the higher higher IQ positions, then you aren't going to be in a position to be a head coach unless you got a buddy. And so black coaches aren't in that position. So right. That I'm going to turn this to a football argument, and going from C-Mac there, but it's important to point out, certain flaws and certain things that we hide behind to try to say that racism doesn't exist or that white people get discriminated against because there are metrics there and it doesn't exist.
Okay, Mr. Debate Man.
It was a good conversation this week, you guys. So we have some homework. Chanel, do you want to go over the reflections and the homework? You want me to do it?
Yeah, I can't find the slides right now. So
that's fine. I could do it. So next week we're going into 6 through 9. So hopefully you guys have been reading and you're going to be caught up with us for that conversation. But for your reflection questions, we have 4. What intergenerational racist ideas have you internalized? And really to be truly and honest with yourself, to really look at that and see where you are in that spectrum that we shared. And we can post that as well. I'm sure we can post that, Chanel, right? Yep, and then how are you pursuing racial justice and anti-racism in your own life when no one is looking? So how are you showing up? Do you agree that white people are the standard for the American ideal? And finally, how can you, as an emerging anti-racist, better view people? So hopefully you guys can, if you want, you can put those comments in the box, or, you can, just reflect on yourself and have that conversation. So Tori and Chanel, last word, last call to action.
Last word, I don't even know if it's the last call to action, but I have to steal 5 more minutes of your time because we did not talk about Ozu Bay. There are a lot of Baltimore people on here, and in Ozu Bay, there was a restaurant in the Baltimore area. Been there one time. I thought the food was honestly garbage, but I thought it looked pretty cool in there. And they had a situation over the past few days, not sure exactly which day, but there was a black family and there was a dress code, and they said their child couldn't go in because their 10-year-old child or so had a t-shirt and shorts on. Well, on the balcony where they were chilling, there was a white kid in a white family that had on the exact same athletic attire, but they were eating and they wouldn't let the black family come in. and they couldn't really give him a good excuse. And he was literally asked, like, do you live close by so you can go change? When she's literally looking at someone wearing the exact same thing as her child. Now, I encourage y'all all to Google that and look up that video because it's important for you to understand what that feels like. That's discrimination right in your face. That's racism right in your face. And it hurts when it hits you, but it hurts even more when it hits your child.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that everyone should be outraged about. Now, Ozube isn't going to be getting any of my money for the time being, but I'm also a person that believes in, you know what, if they do things culturally to try to change it, hopefully change becomes real. My thing is understanding the climate that we're in. Why is that happening? You know, why aren't people getting ahead of the curve to make sure that their employees and really their leaders, because you can't really do too much about a waiter or waitress because they kind of come and go. But a person in a leadership position who's dealing with people, that's on Atlas Restaurant Group or whatever they're called. And to make sure that their folks have bias training and to make sure these things like this doesn't happen. So they're not getting my money for a while, and I would encourage y'all not to do that for a while, but also believe that they should have the opportunity to get things right and to change in the future. Because if not, then I feel like I'm a part of the same system that I'm trying to continue to fight against. You know, we're all going to grow, we're all going to create change. There's going to have to be together, even with these corporations who may be doing things that we may not agree with. We got to give people the opportunity to change and get it right. If not, then how are we going to ever make progress?
Yeah, and I think my closing thought was that last question about how can we as emergent anti-racists better view people? How we view people and what we choose to see and what we allow our minds to see is super, super important. And I think even me as a Black woman, I'm realizing how I may have been looking at people in a negative light and not even realizing it. So we got to really have to be like detectives. We have to pay really, really close attention to all the subtle things that we have going on and all the overt things that we're like, we clearly need to change. The more we do that, I think these things naturally change. And again, I want to encourage you to keep just doing the work internally. I know a lot of people are feeling like every day they have to post a million things and they have to prove that they're anti-racist. It's okay for you not to be there yet. It's a problem if you realize that you're not there and you're not doing the work. But a lot of the work is internal. A lot of the work is things that we're not going to be able to see, but you can see and that you know within yourselves. And I think it's just really important that all of us, Black, white, Asian, Indian, whoever, we all have to just do a lot of self-examination and examining the people in our direct circles. There's so many people who have told me, my mom is this way, but she's a good person. She just doesn't understand. No, let's call it what it is. Your mom's racist, and that you need to help her through this process so that hopefully she can become anti-racist. And we have to start just being really honest with ourselves and with the people around us. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck in this talking about this forever, and our kids are going to grow up living in the same world that we're in today. And I refuse for that to happen. And I hope that you guys are all on board with this as well.
Thank you, guys.
Can we just let it ride out for like 2 minutes so I can just see some comments? Is that okay? I know we're like a couple minutes. Thank you, Ty. I just want to read some comments.
Something that I know you talked about before was literally reading that dress code that was created. That was something that we didn't.
You said what?
Reading the dress code that was created for the restaurant.
Yeah, the dress code was, I talked about that. There was a Black person that they had in their head, and they said, all these things that this person is wearing, this is what we're going to make our dress code.
Right.
We think about what the shirt being above the knees, the shirt being not below the pockets, the hats, can't wear a beanie. Like they literally had a visual of somebody, a Black person, probably a Black man in their head. And they said, if anybody comes in with these things, then we're gonna deny them. And who typically wears those things? You know, so yes, Tiara, change starts within your home and your community. We have to stop seeing people. Somebody else said this on a podcast that I heard. People look at Black people and like, oh, we have to save them. We have to like We have to help them develop. We have to develop them. And that's that assimilationist thought, instead of we have to bring out what's already in there, and we have to help change these policies so that these kids and these people can actually flourish like they're capable of doing. We're
Right.
all capable. No race is just incapable of doing better. And so we have to stop addressing people as the problem. And that's the biggest thing I've learned from Kendi so far. And I shifted my lenses a little bit too, so that I'm making sure that I'm applying those things in my life too.
Holding ourselves accountable.
Yep.
Well, thank you guys.
All right. Thank you as always. We'll continue the conversation. I'll post something on Instagram if you guys want to keep chatting about these topics. Until then, we will see you next Tuesday.
Yes, same time.
Same time next Tuesday. What'd you say, Tori?
Same time, same place. See y'all next week.
Yep. See you guys. Thank you for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.